My name is Rick Rogers. I am Associate Director of the Office of Drinking Water and Source Water Protection in EPA's Mid-Atlantic Regional Office in Philadelphia. So I'm honored to moderate this panel. You've heard from the federal level of agencies and now just recently the state agencies, but now you're going to hear from your local authorities and townships. So I wanted to say thank you all for participating. Given the size of the panel, we don't have time to go through biographies of everybody, but I do want to say that I can speak personally here that everybody up here has done their utmost best to address this issue, work with the citizens, work with the Department of Defense and EPA and Pennsylvania DEP. So kudos to everyone here that has been impacted, and we look forward to hearing from you and your experiences. So we have Christopher Crockett from Aqua America, as well as Bill Walker, Mike Pickle, and Michael McGee from Horsham Township, Greg Schuster, Tim Hagee from Warminster Township, Barry Luber and Chad Corey from Warrington Township, as well as Kyle Seckinger and Michael Sullivan from Warwick Township. So we'll get started. We're just going to do this in alphabetical order. For Chris Crockett, Aqua America.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Chris Crockett. I'm our Chief Environmental Officer for Aqua America. And I want to thank EPA for inviting Aqua to participate in this session and discuss the serious issue around PFAS challenging water systems today. Just to give a little background, next slide please. Aqua, Pennsylvania, we serve 1.2 million customers in the several county area of Delaware, Chester, Montgomery, Berks, and Bucks County. That includes 112 municipalities. At Aqua, our mission is protecting and providing their most essential resource, and whenever anything interferes with that, it really is taken incredibly seriously. We've worked very hard to make sure 24/7, 365 that our drinking water meets or exceeds any of the state or federal standards. And we really have been active and very concerned about the issue of PFAS, dedicating a lot of time and energy to addressing this for our customers. So since we're here and we're on limited time, we want to make sure that we're giving EPA our input on what we think their priorities should be. Second slide. We are experts at treating and delivering water. The picture up there shows, we invest in the highest levels of technology to be able to look for this down to the part per trillion level. We're one of the only water supplier certified laboratories for this in the states of New Jersey and PA. So we're experts at treating and delivering water, but we are not health experts. We are not toxicologists. We really depend on EPA and the federal and DEP and the federal state agencies to set those guidelines, to set those limits, and we've been doing that since 1974 with the Safe Drinking Water Act. With PFAS, we need to continue moving along with that process. So our first request to EPA is please set a standard as soon as possible for PFOS and PFOA, and also develop a clear framework on how we're going to tackle the remaining several thousand members of the PFAS family so that we can make the proper technology investments, not only to address the current chemicals we're talking about today, but the ones in the future that may not be treated the same way and may not work with GAC. Second, I want to make sure that we give a priority to cleaning up sources. As other speakers have mentioned, the sources of PFOS and PFOA in this area are well known at the military base, and we need to immediately address those sources, and we need to get them cleaned up as fast as possible. In fact, we want EPA and DEP to make sure that they start implementing cleanup standards and that the DoD immediately accelerate a lot of the actions that they have. Specifically at the base, though they've been working on this, they really need to implement treatment on the discharge from the Air National Guard base, and they need to do it consistently and at a high level. Every day, thousands of parts per trillion of PFOS and PFOA go into the stream in Park Creek and go 12 miles downstream to drinking water intakes. That water is moved around and the contamination is spread throughout a much larger area than just the immediate base area. And that's another suggestion we have, is that the affected area of the bases is not just an arbitrary distance from the base, but based on science, because this contamination can spread much farther than originally believed. And last, we need to make sure that when we deal with cleanup and responsibilities and we set standards for cleanup and responsibility, that the military is held responsible for paying for that cleanup and the long-term costs associated in those communities. And it's not just left as a burden on those communities. Next slide, please. So we want to talk about what we've been doing real briefly at Aqua America since the 2016 health advisory level 70 parts per trillion. We immediately went through and started sampling our sources in eastern Montgomery County, looking for sources. Though none of our sources were above the health advisory of 70 part per trillion, we did institute testing at a much more sensitive detection level than originally was available in 2014 and 2016. And we went and identified a couple of sources that were near that health advisory level, and we immediately took them offline in Hatboro and Chalfont, and we installed GAC filtration systems in them. In addition to that, we've collected over 1,100 samples for PFAS through our certified laboratory, and we've posted that information transparently for the public to see on our waterfacts.com website. So you can go on there and see information about what we've been detecting in your community. And we've been evaluating different types of treatment, getting familiar with how to implement these systems, and looking at new technologies that are out there. And we've also been spending a lot of time coordinating with communities, political representatives, as well as the Base Realignment Committee, and sharing our information with the military. Next slide, please. But that's not enough. We can't stop there. At Aqua, we have decided that in light of the recent information from the CDC report, and due to the lack of any guidance of a regulatory limit from EPA or DEP, we are going to continue moving forward with a tiered action plan, starting with sources that are at the highest concentrations and identifying actions, whether it's treatment or taking them offline, and working our way down to the systems and wells with the lowest concentrations. We're going to continue to implement that tiered plan until EPA and DEP implement regulatory guidance. We're doing this voluntarily and ahead of any regulations, with the anticipation that we will be supported by EPA and DEP in those actions, as well as local communities that help us with the permitting and siting process. Beyond that, we want to make sure that people know that we will continue to take action, and that we will continue to keep the public informed through our waterfacts.com website about what we're doing and our progress in implementing that plan. Last, I want to again thank EPA for inviting us here to talk about this, and letting EPA, DEP, and all of our partners know that we stand ready to be involved, provide our expertise and information and our assistance in any way possible to address this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Crockett. We're going to bounce on the other side of the stage now with Horsham Township. Up first is Bill Walker, the Township Manager from Horsham Township, followed by Mike Pickle from the Water and Sewer Authority, and then Michael McGee from the Horsham Land Redevelopment Authority.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. We are going to tag team on this presentation, myself and Mike McGee and Mike Pickle. We want to thank the EPA and DEP for this day and having us here and involved with this engagement. Next slide, please. So Horsham Township, we're a little over 17 square miles. We're home to over 26,000 residents, and we have 32,000 people that work in Horsham Township. We're also home to the Horsham Air Guard Station, and we have the entire Naval Air Station Willow Grove in our boundaries of Horsham Township. Next slide, please. So in July of 2014, none of us in Horsham even knew what PFCs or PFOS stood for, let alone how to pronounce it or spell it. But we got the results of a positive test in July of 2014, and we immediately took steps to come into compliance at that time. In May of 2016, EPA, of course, established and issued their lifetime health advisory level of 70 parts per trillion. And at that time, Horsham Township Council directed the staff and township consultants to come up with a short-term remediation plan and report back to them in 6 weeks. We weren't going to rely on anyone, the federal government or the state government, to take care of ourselves. Township Council adopted the Horsham standard, and that was non-detect. At that time in 2016, non-detect in the industry was 5 parts per trillion combined, and that was our goal. In 6 weeks, we were back in front of Township Council with 3 options of a short-term plan that would take us to non-detect. They selected one of the options, and we immediately started implementation of that option. We also retained the assistance of a public awareness firm to assist us, and retained an internationally recognized consultant to provide technical expertise. We started implementation of that plan, and Council immediately instructed the staff and consultants to develop a long-term remediation plan for Horsham Township. We again were in front of Horsham Council in September of 2016 with options for a long-term plan. Council selected one of those options to be implemented, and that option is currently being implemented. We completed our short-term remediation plan in early 2017, and I'm very happy to report in April of 2017, our public water system in Horsham Township has been at a non-detect status. All of these efforts have been accomplished at a very significant cost to the Horsham tax citizens. Currently, the out-of-pocket expense for Horsham Township is currently approaching $1 million. Even more importantly, the stigma of the contamination has potentially impacted local real estate values and employment opportunities. Next slide, please. So our 4-pronged approach to this in Horsham that we developed also in May of 2016 was education, communication, remediation, and compensation. And that's what we've been working on and working through since that time, and that's been our approach. Next slide, please. So Horsham has been able to accomplish these efforts through funding from a cooperative agreement with the United States Navy and the National Guard Bureau, also funding from a Penvest grant, an ongoing surcharge paid by the Horsham Water and Sewer Authority ratepayers that they should not be paying. We'll talk about that in our recommendations, but we have had to place a PFC surcharge on the ratepayers to help pay to get to non-detect status, and also township funds, which I just mentioned. At this time, next slide, and at this time I'll turn it over to Mike Pickle with the Water and Sewer Authority.
Okay, thanks, Bill. When it comes to talking about the Horsham drinking water and the PFOS contamination, I'm gratified to say that the key word now is was, not is or has been, which is how you typically see it in the news or press releases, but was. When this started, Horsham had 14 active wells and 2 interconnects with surface water supplies. In 2014, when UCMR3 detected 2 of the wells above the then 200 and 400 parts per trillion health action levels, they were shut down and removed from service. Those 2 wells have been since returned to service last year with GAC treatment funded by the Navy. 3 more wells were impacted in 2016 when it was dropped to 70 parts per trillion. Those 3 wells have temporary GAC treatment on them right now, and one of the wells we're actually doing a pilot plant of ion exchange resin. We also had to install 1.8 miles of new water mains to connect private wells where there wasn't water available. We needed to extend those mains so that we could hook up the private wells that were impacted. We've also, as part of our long-term plan that Bill mentioned, we are installing an interconnect with a second interconnect with one of the utilities in order to flow the water better through our system. And we are also now, with the money from the Penvest grant, installing carbon treatment on 5 more wells that are currently out of service. When these 5 wells come back into service, we will take the 3 wells that have the temporary GAC out of service to have permanent treatment installed on them, and we're also installing treatment on a interconnect with one of the neighboring utilities. In all, we will have 11 PFOS treatment systems in place. Next slide. So currently, right now, as Bill mentioned, we are achieving about 4 parts per trillion as a mass balance or weighted average, if you will, of the existing sources, and we intend to do better. But that level is 17 times lower than the current health action level of 70 parts per trillion. And as Bill mentioned, it's the cost right now to the Horsham ratepayers to pay for the more purchased water as we move through the plan and to eventually pay for the carbon or ion exchange operational costs are expected to be about $1.2 million per year. Next slide. Challenges. Putting this treatment on can sometimes be very difficult. Not all of our wells are located on big plots of ground. Some of them are actually nicely tucked into neighborhoods. These GAC treatments are larger. If you can imagine taking a building that might be mistaken for a shed and now making it about 3 to 4 times bigger and twice as high and sticking it next to a house, it's not popular. And that's the case what we've had to do in some of these. Next slide. It's also not cheap. The operational costs are expensive. It's about $22,000 per vessel, and our treatment sites have multiple vessels, but $22,000 per vessel for exchanging the GAC. The carbon changeouts, when we are doing them, we have to take the wells out of service, and then currently it's not out for a number of days, so we lose that supply when we're doing that. Going from what had been traditional groundwater system to where we will now have 11 permanent PFOS treatment systems is really a transformative undergoing of the Water Authority. Life will never be the same. It's going to be more difficult, more challenging. And we also trying to get the ion exchange permanent, and we're working with the state on that so that we can move forward with hopefully something that can give us a smaller footprint and be cheaper. Next slide. Bill.
As mentioned by the state panel, private wells are very difficult. There's no government agency that regulates private wells, but they were impacted greatly with this contamination. So in Horsham Township, over 450 private wells were tested. 101 tested above the lifetime health advisory level. 88 of those 101 have been connected to the public water system, with others pending. And we have 78 properties that have been tested between 40 and 70 parts per trillion. And as Mike just mentioned, they extended about 2 miles, almost 2 miles of water main extensions for those, I believe it's 56 of the 78 properties. So 56 of the 78 properties now already have access to public water, to connect to public water. But private wells have been impacted greatly with this contamination. Next slide, please. Also mentioned by Chris from Aqua, we have great concern with the stormwater that is leaving both bases, the Horsham Air Guard Station and the Naval Air Station in Willow Grove, and the levels that the surface water is leaving and going into the different watersheds, the Pennypack Creek watershed, and the Neshaminy watershed around the bases. They have taken some actions, both the Air Guard Station and the Navy base, but we are looking for more immediate short-term actions to completely stop that from getting into the creeks or greatly reduce it. So stormwater is another major concern of ours with the contamination. At this point, next slide, please, and we'll turn it over to Mike McGee.
Hi, my name is Mike McGee, and I'm the Executive Director of the Horsham Land Redevelopment Authority. The authority was created in 2006 as a result of the Base Realignment and Closure Act, which called for the closure of the former NASJRB Willow Grove. As has been pointed out, we still continue to have the Horsham Air Guard Station in town, which was the site of the previous United States Air Force Reserve Center. So we continue to have a strong military presence here in Horsham, and we're delighted with that. However, when the Naval Air Station was declared surplus, it was incumbent upon the township to step forward and create an authority that was ultimately recognized by DOD, Department of Defense, Office of Economic Adjustment, as the single point of contact for the redevelopment of the base. After a long process, we created a redevelopment plan, which is depicted on the slide, and I won't bother going into all that, but the details of that plan are located on our website at www.hlra.org, and I would encourage those interested to visit that website. It's basically a mixed-use development. We have an extensive amount of office-type potential there, as well as residential and retail. So we're looking forward to that redevelopment. And next slide, please. The redevelopment of the base, BRAC law called for the properties to be closed and eligible for transfer to the private sector, getting it back on the tax rolls. The properties theoretically were available to go back onto the tax rolls back in 2011. For various reasons, that has not taken place, but the reason that's holding us up at this point is the PFAS issues surrounding the potential redevelopment of the property. We are unable to establish value at this time of the property, and what impact, if any, it has, the remediation will have on that redevelopment plan. The federal government, the United States Navy, will transfer the property and undoubtedly will have significant land use controls as well as deed restrictions on the property, and we've yet to analyze that impact on our redevelopment plan. The ability to establish the property values is a key factor in our delay in redevelopment at this time. Next slide, please. Some of our concerns center around the lack of standards for soil and surface water and sediment that put the LRA at risk with regard to our future development. The problem has been pointed out numerous times today that the problem is not really the water, it's the soils and so forth that the contamination leaches into our aquifer. And that needs to be addressed by EPA, and standards have to be established so that we know how to move forward. Repeating myself here, current focus on the drinking water does not address the problem, and we need to move forward with that. Recommendations, Bill?
Next slide, please. So our recommendation and needs in Horsham. The impacts of the past exposure cannot be ignored. More extensive epidemiology testing for the community is needed to include former military members assigned to these bases. Risk communication strategies to address public concerns concerning past exposures and regulatory inconsistencies are needed. As the source of the PFOS contamination is known, citizens of Horsham should not bear any cost for removing PFOS from their drinking water, past or future cost. Next slide, please. The raw water in the aquifer remains contaminated, and we know it's going to be a very long time that the aquifer will be contaminated. But the Horsham Water and Sewer Authority treating the water at their own wells should not be the long-term remediation method for the aquifer. Sources of PFOS remain at the base, in the water and in the soil, and it must be mitigated. The Horsham Water and Sewer Authority and other utilities and state primary agencies need guidance in determining the best available technologies for treatment and appropriate permitting strategies. Turn over to next slide and turning it back to Mike.
From an LRA perspective, PFOS and PFOA should obviously be listed on the CERCLA hazardous substance, as a CERCLA hazardous substance. The government should retain liability for all PFOS contamination resulting from past use and/or spills on the military property. The government standards should be consistent. The differences between ATSDR and EPA need to be resolved. EPA should require the former NASJRB Willow Grove and the Horsham Air Guard Station to have one remedial plan and that same expedited schedule. Given the financial impact to the township and its residents, the federal government should transfer ownership of the property at no cost once the remediation plan has been implemented.
Next slide, please. So Horsham continues to be a great place to live, work, and play. Thanks to the expedited efforts of the Horsham Township community, our drinking water continues to be high quality and safe. Horsham will be a leader in redeveloping property impacted by PFOS contamination. But we need EAP's help. We need EPA's assistance in promptly and quickly establishing standards. We need to move our community forward. Those of us who know Horsham, the Willow Grove base takes over 8% of our township, and we need to move our township forward, and we can't do that without standards being established for this contamination and the redevelopment of the Navy base. Next slide, please. So we thank you for coming to Horsham Township, EPA, for hosting this meeting, especially Region 3 staff that we continuously work with. We also thank the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection and the Southeast Regional Office that is continuously working with us on this issue and for their guidance and support.
Thank you, Bill, Mike, Michael. Next up, we're bouncing to this table over here. We have Warminster Township. So Greg Schuster, the Township Manager of Warminster Township, and Tim Hagee, the General Manager of the Warminster Municipal Authority.
Good afternoon. I'm Tim Hagee. I'm the General Manager of the Warminster Township Municipal Authority. As a brief update on actions that the authority has taken, I'd like to say that we continue to exceed standards for PFOS and PFOA. We believe that the EPA level of 70 parts combined for PFOS and PFOA is not an acceptable standard for our customers, our neighbors, and our community. Primarily because some of the levels that was detected through UCMR 3 in the 1,200 parts per trillion may have been ingested for decades. So what has been consistent with EPA and particularly ATSDR is that these compounds are bioaccumulative. We didn't want to add any additional PFOS, PFOA compounds to our neighbors, our families, and our residents. We think this area is unique in the amount of level of these contaminants that our customers have been exposed to. We've been working to maintain and rebuild our customers' trust. We acted quickly. We communicated that. I think we had temporary treatment on one of our wells within 6 days of finding out about this contamination. We shut down our wells immediately. One, we had to wait till the system was modified so we could shut it down, but we shut it down as quickly as we possibly could. Even before EPA came out with the 70 parts as a lifetime health advisory from the 600 parts previously, we had been working to obtain water from a neighboring community, the Forest Park plant through the North Wales Water Authority, and subsequent to the 70 parts announcement in May of 2016, we had a contract signed and completed, and an interconnection was utilized to allow essentially at that time 100% of the water supply to our customers to come from the Forest Park plant. Currently, we're about 90% Forest Park water supply. The other 10% are coming from our wells that have treatment on. We have GAC treatment on 3 of our wells that we are putting out into the public water supply. We're working to get an approval for resin treatment. GAC is not without its challenges. We pioneered resin treatment at our well 26. We're working with DEP on a study to allow resin to be utilized solely without GAC, and that'll enable us to have a smaller footprint particularly for capital costs for the wells. Some of the other communities have said the challenges of a large addition to your well footprint, the building footprint. Resin uses a smaller vessel, and it lasts a lot longer, and it doesn't have some of the challenges of anthracite-based carbon. We're working with our legislators, particularly at the state level. Representative O'Neill has been working diligently with us to provide state funding. We believe if he's successful, we'll have an announcement in the near future about state funding that can help with our customers for them not to pay for all the cleanup costs. Next slide. How can the EPA help? A simple issue, communicating the lab standards for UCMR testing. We're all here because of UCMR. UCMR is a wonderful tool. Without UCMR 3, we wouldn't have found out about the PFAS contamination. But our normal lab standard would indicate a exceedance for any regulated water standard. So, for example, if we violated the arsenic standard of 100 parts, that lab would be required to notify DEP. We'd get a lab sample that clearly indicates an exceedance. With UCMR 3 testing, that was not done. What happens with UCMR 3, you do an initial sample round, and then months later you do another round to confirm that data. The lab did not have the standards that they could communicate that to us. So that would be helpful in the future. So we would have a quicker response to any exceedance. So UCMR 4 is in the works. I'm certainly going to be well aware of any standard that's for those compounds. I'm going to work with the lab, make sure that they know. But I can tell you it would have been helpful for us to know immediately that we had an exceedance. Others have said it, I'll repeat it. It would be very helpful if PFAS was defined as a CERCLA hazardous substance. That's going to help with funding. You see, I've noticed funding, as Horsham has mentioned. Our customers, our residents, our family, has not caused contamination of the water supply, and they certainly shouldn't be responsible for the cleanup costs. A couple other items that would be helpful: deadlines. Deadlines for cleanup at the bases. If we're honest here, alarm bells went off in 2014. This is 2018. The last TRC meeting in Horsham, they were still talking about doing additional studies. We need deadlines. We need deadlines that people can be held accountable to and that we move quickly toward. It's been 4 years. We could use a unified response. We've had a wonderful response from the Navy, a wonderful response from the Air National Guard. There is some friction between the DoD agencies for some residents. It's not acceptable that some of those residents still are provided bottled water when they have the ability to be connected to the public water supply to supply clean, potable drinking water for their family. I would ask that the EPA use their influence to enable those customers that are still using bottled water to be connected to the public water supply. A unified response would be great. The different agencies have different funding sources, and there is friction in that regard. I would say, again, the Navy has funded treatment systems for 3 of our wells. It's been a wonderful response. Mr. Greg Preston has been a great partner in that way. The Air National Guard has affected the Warminster Authority in a slightly less way, and Mr. Freihofer has been a wonderful partner in that regard. So thank you for allowing me to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me as well. The pressing item that I would like to impart is really the sense of urgency. And my comments are directed not just at the EPA, but I'm going to say the federal government in general. What you've seen or heard from Mr. Hagee as well as Mr. Walker and his team is what happens at the local level, and that is immediate action. There was decisions made that customers, residents shouldn't have these contaminants, and as quickly as possible, measures were taken to eliminate that. I wish we had that same response, that same attitude from our federal partners, but to date we don't. The Navy and other organizations have been very helpful in the parameters that have been set up for them, but those parameters need to be changed. If I were to give a personal example, about a year ago, I purchased a home in the area. It's on a private well. Because of the knowledge of all this, I decided to have the well tested, and of course there was PFOA, PFOS in there. It wasn't above the 70 parts per trillion health advisory limit, but what do you think I did? You think I let my wife, 2 young kids, 2 cats and a dog move in? No, I put a filter on before they moved in. That's how we feel about our family, and I don't think I did anything different than any other responsible adult or responsible parent would do. Just like at the local level, I don't think we're doing anything different than we would do for our own family. We want to make sure we do everything we possibly can to make sure we're the safest drinking water possible. The technology exists. As Tim was just saying, here we are 4 years later, waiting. Warminster should have filters put on every single well by the federal government who polluted the source. We're waiting. We know it doesn't reach the 70 parts per trillion. We don't care. To be blunt, we just don't care. How many decades have our residents been drinking this water? How long has it been accumulating in their bodies? The long-term studies are critical, but that's just what they are, long-term. We're not going to know the answers. I pray that 30 years from now we figure out this chemical is really not that, as harmful as we thought it was. I don't think that's going to happen, but I don't want to wait. I don't want my family to wait. I don't want my residents to wait. I want to have immediate action to get this taken care of. So our message, very clearly, is that the federal government caused this problem. The federal government solved this problem. The technology exists to get this done right now. The residents shouldn't be held accountable. They are paying higher rates right now for the water the authority had to purchase from North Wales. They shouldn't have to do that. That should be reimbursed until the filters get put in place. So what I am imparting, or hoping to impart to our federal partners, is that sense of urgency. Treat us like you would treat your family. Treat us like you were at the local level and you knew that if you didn't help someone out or solve a problem, they were going to come knocking on your door, which is what they do. I don't know how to get that message across, but I'm hopeful that the partners at EPA will work with them and keep driving that message home, as well as everyone who has turned out here. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg and Tim. Next up will be Warrington Township. Barry Luber, the Township Manager in Warrington Township, along with Chad Corey from CKS Engineers representing Warrington's Water Department.
Thank you, Rick. Again, I'm Barry Luber, Warrington Township Manager. Just for those of you out of the area, Warrington is just north of Horsham Township and the Horsham Air Guard Station. Similar in size to Horsham, we're about 24,000 residents. I'm sorry, can we get the next slide, please? October 2014, our public wells were tested in conjunction with the UCMR 3 requirement, and 3 of our 11 wells were over the contamination level. We immediately took those offline in October of 2014, and we purchased supplementary public water from North Wales Water Authority. Next slide, please. On those 3 wells that we took offline, we contracted and got built 3 GAC systems. They're just now being tested and will be up and running soon. In 2015, we entered a cooperative agreement with the Air National Guard for the installation and remedial measures in the amount of $5.9 million. In 2016, in May, as everyone knows, EPA released a new combined health advisory limit of 70 parts per trillion, and that forced us 2 more wells were now over that limit, and we took those offline immediately. Treatment is being, GA systems are being designed for those wells, and they will be put on those wells as soon as possible. Next slide, please. Okay. In the summer of 16, at a public meeting held at Central Bucks High School, due to the large crowd that was there, probably similar, maybe even a little larger than the crowd that's here today, the public demanded from the Warrington Board of Supervisors that they get non-detect levels of drinking water. It was a pretty strong mandate, and the people were adamant about that. Our elected officials, Warrington Board of Supervisors, did an agreement with North Wales Water for public water. So we're not using any of our wells currently. We're using all public water at this point. To do that, we had to construct a couple additional interconnects and a booster station to get the water flowing from North Wales source to the township. In August of 2017, we made the complete transition to 100% public water from North Wales water source. Next slide, please. In addition, Warrington has connected 26 homes with contaminated private wells to public water and sealed those wells. We've installed water main extensions to provide public water service to contaminated areas. And in 2017, in October, we have an amendment to the cooperative agreement with the Air National Guard for funding to bring the total funding to $13.5 million to pay for some of those items, the GAC systems, the booster stations, the interconnects, and a little bit of public water. The funding through the cooperative agreement, as everyone knows, is only for the amounts exceeding 70 parts per trillion. The township is committed to providing water as non-detect levels to all users. As stated by Bill and Greg and my fellow managers and authority representatives here, we're looking to the EPA and I guess the federal government to set a standard for PFAS and PFOA, which will allow which would require the Department of Defense to assist with funding to make all the water non-detect. In January of 2018, the Board of Supervisors had to pass a rate increase to our ratepayers for the water rates. It's unacceptable, but we had to do it to treat our water supply. In May of 2018, we joined Horsham and Warminster Townships in a lawsuit against 3M, the manufacturer of the chemicals. Again, just want to reiterate what some of my colleagues have said. None of these costs should be passed on to the ratepayers, to the residents of our townships. It should all be covered by the federal government, and we look to the federal government to assist us with this so that we do not have to pass on further rate increases or any additional costs that we incur. In closing, I'd just like to thank Cosmo and Rick for inviting us and for organizing this event, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Barry. Appreciate it. Last but not least, Warwick Township is here. Kyle Seckinger, Township Manager, and Michael Sullivan, Manager of the Warwick Township Water and Sewer Authority. Gentlemen.
Thank you. I'm Kyle Seckinger, the Manager of Warwick Township in Bucks County. What Mr. Schuster said and what Mr. Hagee said really echo the sentiments of Warwick Township as far as making sure that the responsible party is the one that pays for the remediation. Warwick has been fortunate in that the impact has been relatively limited, but with one important exception. And we'd like the EPA to turn its attention to the Hartsville section of Warwick Township, which is Grammy Lane, Hart Lane, near Old York Road and Bristol Road. This section is served by private wells. These residents have been on bottled water for exceeding 2 years at this point. The bottled water is coming from the Navy, who operate the former Warminster base. The Navy has funded public water connections, both in neighboring communities as well as one currently in Warwick Township. But the Hartsville section has not been addressed. And it's been a few years now. And as some other managers and authority directors have stated, there should be a sense of urgency. There should be deadlines placed to provide this funding. And we implore the EPA to obligate the Warminster Navy base in any means necessary to remediate the Hartsville section. Mike?
Thank you, Kyle. Again, my name is Mike Sullivan. I'm the Executive Director of the Warwick Township Water and Sewer Authority. Although Warwick Township is in very close proximity to the known contamination area, we're not dealing with some of the same issues that our neighboring municipalities are. Warwick Township Authority abandoned all of its groundwater sources several decades ago through development pressure. We're fortunate that we purchase 100% of our water from surface water suppliers, most of which these other municipalities have used to rectify their situations. As Kyle mentioned, there are portions of Warwick Township that we have concerns about. We have one cooperative agreement with the Navy to address several areas in the township where there are elevated levels of PFOS. We want to continue that effort, as Kyle mentioned, in the Hartsville section. I think it's very important. Those people, there have been several properties that have tried to sell over the recent years, and these known contamination issues are causing property value damage. So the authority's committed to extend water facilities to any area of the township to service those areas that are served by private wells at the moment when the appropriate funding becomes available. Once again, we would urge our colleagues from EPA to emphasize to the governmental agencies to move that process forward more quickly. I'd also like to thank the EPA, as others have, for having us here today, but mostly I'd like to commend some of my colleagues at the local level. I think we're fortunate to have such dedicated, proactive professionals managing our utilities through this difficult process. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. We really appreciate your input, your thoughts, your recommendations. We've heard you. Thanks for coming.